So welcome to our financial basics workshop this evening, where we're going to get to talk about personal finance and learn a few tips and tricks along the way. Again, as a financial counselor with SISIP, we are available to you anytime as well, even though you're out of the country. I am full-time virtual counselor, so I'm here to talk with anyone that wants to discuss anything, and I will put my contact information at the end of the presentation. So a lot of information to go through, so we're going to jump right into it. So with some of the things we're going to learn today's presentation, we're going to talk about how to manage spending and to prepare a realistic budget. We're also going to talk about different ways and tips to save. And although sometimes some of those tricks and tips seem rather obvious, we often forget about those little things. So hopefully we can bring some help on your ways on how to save some money. And some of the benefits of all this, it's help taking control of your financial future, helping you achieve your life goals, provide for yourself and your family, and being a smarter consumer, helping reduce stress. Financial stress can be a big one for a lot of people. Sleepless night is just one of them. It can create problems in relationships and families. So it is important to look at our personal finance. Couple of quiz questions just to start at the beginning. So current average percentage of income that Canadians save. So I'll let everyone get a chance, maybe use the chat box to put their answer on A, B, or C, just to see what everyone thinks. So I'll give everyone a minute or so here. Well, more like 30 seconds. So we got some answers coming through. So this was as of 2021 was the last update. So 5%. 5% is low. Most financial books would tell us that we're supposed to save about 20% of our income. Realistically, in today's financial environment, not necessarily doable. So 10% right now is probably a good target number. So if you're doing above 5% of savings, you're doing better than the national average, which means you're definitely doing better than most Canadians. But 10% is definitely a good target number currently. Let's see, the percentage of Canadian households that use a budget to manage their finances. So again, 3 options. I'll give everyone a chance to answer in the chat box. A, B, or C, 32%, 46, and 68. How many of us say that we use a budget anyway? So we've got some answers coming through. All right, so a lot of people went with the lower answer of A. So actually 46%. So, most of us say that we are using a household budget. But then the question remains is, are we using it properly? I know when it comes to budgeting, there's been a lot of different information over time. So we're really going to talk on how to properly utilize our budget. Last but not least, the best way to plan for unexpected expenses is, hey, buy a lottery ticket every week. B, only have friends who will lend us money, or C, set money aside in emergency savings fund. So that one, just to throw a little bit of fun out there. I think the lottery ticket, unfortunately, our chances are not very good. I think everyone's answering that one properly in the chat here. It's great to have friends that are willing to pay money, but it's also a great way to break some friendships. So borrowing money from friends and family is sometimes a dangerous thing to do. So obviously, C, set some money aside, emergency funds in case we need it, is the safest way when it comes to be prepared for unexpected expenses. All right, so now we're going to jump into the meat of things. We're going to talk about budgeting. Now, most of us have heard about budgeting. Most of us know what is a budget. But there's sometimes, some information in there or clarifications that are good to have. So 93% of Canadians who have a budget stick to it. So when we get into that habit of utilizing a budget, it's something that we see the usefulness behind it, all the benefits behind it. So once we start doing it, most people keep doing it. So that's the great news. The hard part is starting to do it. And a lot of people think that creating a budget is just that. Here's what I think my expenses are each month. Does it work with my income? Yes. Hey, I have a budget. So really, we're going to talk a little bit more what really a budget is. So first, parts of a budget, fairly simple. Income and expenses are the 2 main parts of any budget. So when we talk about income, we only talk about regular monthly income. So it can be through work, pensions, investments, and things of the sort. but it's any income that's regular. So depending on if you get quarterly incomes for either tax benefits or investments that pay quarterly, we don't typically count that income in your budget because, again, it's not regular. So we put that in the extra income category, and we'll talk about that kind of income a little bit later. So when first building that budget, again, for your income is anything you receive on a regular monthly basis. Then we talk about expenses. So again, when we look at expenses, there's two types. There's what we call our fixed expenses, so things that are the exact same every month, so such as rent, mortgages, insurances, loan payments. And then we have variable expenses. So when we talk about variable, again, fuel expenses, groceries, utilities can be variable or fixed depending on where you live. Cell phone, again, can be fixed or variable. So it's identifying the type of expenses. Our fixed expenses are great because we know exactly what it is every month, keeps coming back, very easy to manage. They also tend to be often the largest expenses that we have, especially looking at rent and those types of things, vehicle payments and loans. Our variable expenses can, as the name say, vary a fair bit from month to month, which is why, again, it's important to keep track of some of those expenses. Often we always are very good at knowing our large expenses. When it comes to the small spending and the little things, we're not quite as good at knowing what we spend in those areas. And surprisingly enough, they're often areas that we tend to spend a lot more than we think. So when you're first creating a budget, if this is your first budget or you haven't done it in a long time, with the first version you're going to create is what we call your cost of living budget. So this includes everything that you really need to pay for. So it's your housing costs, eating, utilities, those types of necessities. Things like paying down debt, saving goals, and things of the sort will come in after, because we need to first make sure that your cost of living budget works, that all your necessities are paid for on a monthly basis before we start adding to those expenses. So once you have that good cost of living budget, then we can start creating some saving goals and plans, figure out the best way to pay down debt, and add some of those expenses to your budget. So when it comes to budgeting, creating that budget of expenses, as I said earlier, is the easy part. That's just here's my income, here's all my expenses, or what at least I think they are. And then people say I have a budget. Now, unfortunately, that's only about 40% of the budget. The big part of budgeting comes into tracking our expenses, seeing what reality shows us. You could have expected expenses 0 for everything, but if you're tracking every month what you're spending, that really is the budgeting part. Now, there's a lot of different ways to track our spending. Obviously, keeping a receipt is the old classical way of doing it. Writing things down, having a notebook. Now, reviewing bank and credit card statement is another way to help us track spending. Problem with that technique is sometimes the description on our bank or credit card statement doesn't necessarily tell us what we purchased. So then we need to try to remember what it was. Where do I allocate this? For example, let's say you have a Walmart and it just says Walmart, $220. Was it groceries? Was it clothing? Was it a mix of things? Did you buy something for the home? So reviewing bank statements and credit card statement does give you an indication, but it also makes it a little tricky sometimes to figure out what exactly the purchasing was. There's also a lot of apps nowadays that you can link to your banking that will help you do that kind of tracking. And then the problem with those apps is very similar to bank statements and credit card statements, is the more you use them, the better they get. I will absolutely say that. But once you assign a category, so if you assign Walmart, for example, as groceries, then everything you buy at Walmart will show under groceries. So although it does give you some information on the tracking side, it's really not as precise as it could be. So unfortunately, the truth is when it comes to tracking your expenses, The best method is the manual method. And what I mean by manual is not necessarily pen and paper. We do have some tools and Excel spreadsheets that we're more than happy to share with you that can make that job a little bit easier in tracking your spending. But when I say manual, is manual entry, going through your receipt, making sure you're allocating your spending in the right areas. And what's important behind that is for you to simply know exactly what you are spending and on what. And when you have that information, then it gives you the knowledge you need to make personal decision. If the budget is tight, or if you've got certain savings goals, or you're trying to save for something specific, it gives you information you need to make the right decisions. Because unfortunately, our perception and reality doesn't tend to match very often. So that's where having a really good tracking of our spending then gives us really good information to make those kinds of decisions. If you've never tracked your spending, it takes normally about at least 3 months to start getting a good average. The more you do it, the longer you do it, the better the information gets. First one, I'm going to tell you right now, there's always surprises. We always spend more than we think, especially in certain areas and in miscellaneous spending. So you got to be ready to see that. Month 2 and 3, you're starting to validate that information. And after 3 months, now you can start looking at your budget, probably making some adjustment. And as you continue on, like I say, it just keeps getting better. Once we have that, we also need to start planning for irregular expenses, gifts. Christmas is coming. Unfortunately, not that far away. Donations, home repairs, vacations. So then we can really start planning for some of those expenses. So again, once we total our expenses every month, look compared to our income, well, there's 2 options. Either there's a surplus, which is definitely where we want to be. That means there's additional money available for other things, such as saving and aggressively working down debt, or we're in a deficit situation, meaning we spent more than what came in. Normally, when that happens, most individual tends to compensate with credit, which unfortunately that option only works for so long. And then even that option doesn't tend to run out eventually. So we definitely want to be in the surplus situation. If we're in a deficit, then the first place we need to look usually is at our spending to try to identify, are there certain things on there or habits that I can change? Because unfortunately, bringing more income tends to be the hardest thing of the 2. So I'm going to show you a very basic example of what all of this looks like. Again, some people are very visual. So when it comes to tracking our expenses, well, let me take a step back. First, we are going to create our budget. So again, this is a very basic, low income. So we're talking minimum wage job right now, someone making $2,000 a month. Let's say someone's renting a room. So there's their rooming costs, groceries. Right now, $250 is low. I need to update my presentation. Right now, for example, in Canada and Ontario, average for groceries per adult is $300 to $400 a month. This individual has a car, so there's some fuel expense, there's some insurance, and then they don't really have a lot more expenses, so just some miscellaneous spending. So I always throw at least minimum $200 a month for miscellaneous spending. A lot of people think that's a lot. When you think about it, on average, it's $50 a week. In this day and age, $50 can disappear pretty quickly. So we're saying that our expenses are $1,320 a month. So if compared to the income, great, we've got some surplus. So if this holds true, then we have an opportunity to create some savings. If there's debt, start to pay that down. So although this budget might look very basic and very simple, the only difference is our budget might have more lines. So then we just have more things to put in there, but it's the same concept. Now, when it comes to tracking our spending, the old way is at month end, we go through all of our receipts and everything, and we add it all up to see what our actual spending was. And although that works, the downside of doing it that way is now it takes an hour or 2 to do that, which tends to discourage people. And if we overspent, if our budget is tight and we've overspent, we're discovering it after the fact, which doesn't necessarily help us. So a much better way when it comes to budget tracking is to do it on a weekly basis. If we do our tracking on a weekly basis, on average for most people, it's really 5-10 minutes once a week. I always say Sunday morning over coffee, great time to do your budget. The week just ended. Here's what we spent last week, and now we can plan ahead. So this individual, for example, first week was in pay. They paid their rent, they had some groceries, fuel expenses, insurance wasn't due, and they spent their $50. Now you got to think all your fixed expenses, those are just whenever they show up within the month. So the only thing left to really track on a day-to-day basis are your regular expenses, groceries, fuels, and your variable expenses. So everything that's a fixed expense, those are easy to track. So week 2, same thing. Basically, you track. So that was a pay week for this individual. They bought some more groceries, fuel. Again, insurance wasn't due, and then they spent some of their miscellaneous. So by week 3, now we can kind of start looking at things. And again, this is very important when our budget's a little tight. We look at groceries. It's like, okay, that looks like we might spend more than $250. Our fuel expenses is lower, though, so we're spending less. So it's like, okay, that again makes you feel good because it's okay to spend more or less in certain areas. The important part is the overall. So if you spend less in groceries and more on fuel or vice versa, that's okay, as long as it all adds up in the end. So by week 4, again, typical 4-week month, we can definitely see by the end of the month that yes, we spent a little bit more on groceries than we expected. We also spent less in fuel than we expected. Everything else was on target, which means that in the end, we only overspent by $5. In this case, there's a large surplus. It's not a big impact, not a big deal. But again, when our budgets are really tight, this becomes important. So what you expect to spend is a guide. And as you do this, and the more you do this, your guide will become more and more precise. And things happen from month to month, and that's normal for things to fluctuate. So the key is not to say, well, this is my budget for this, and I can't change things. No, it's a guide. What the important part is this tracking piece of when we're tracking our spending to make sure that in the end we don't overspend on the bottom line or we stay within certain guidelines. So it's accurate, realistic information, removing, the thoughts and what we think to what actually is. So again, as I said, when it comes to most of us, budget might have more lines. I just wanted to keep simple for the presentation, but the concept is the same all the way through. So, and we do have tools that can help you with that we are always happy to share with anyone to kind of help you do your budgeting. So when we talk about budgeting, it's really that simple. And the hardest part of budgeting and tracking is getting into that habit. It's the doing it. I always like comparing it for a lot of people. Budgeting is kind of like gym memberships. We buy the membership, but then we forget to go to the gym. It's kind of the same with budgeting. We create the budget, but then we forget about the tracking. And what's the most important part is the tracking, not so much buying the membership, right? So tracking. I will keep repeating myself on that one quite a bit. So now we're going to talk about managing cost of living, being a smarter consumer, talk about different ways and tips on how to save money. Always a great way to save. So did you know 44% of working Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck? And I honestly think that that's probably even higher percentage now. This was 2021 once again, statistics. And again, I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that they're living paycheck to paycheck, especially when we compensate with credit. It gives us the feeling that we're okay money-wise. But when there's not enough money and we compensate with credit, as I said earlier, that only works for so long. Could work for 6 months, could work for a few years, depending on your credit availability. But eventually, when there's not enough income to cover our expenses and we're overcompensating with credit, eventually that option runs out, and now it creates bigger financial issues. So the areas we're going to talk about, tips and tricks on how to save some money. We're going to talk about checking our bills, negotiating better plans when it comes to services such as banking, telephone service, internet, and so on. Little things like packing a lunch, and then talking about larger purchases, car, home, and such. So checking our bills sounds like a very simple one, and I'll be the first to admit that depending on which country you are in, there might be some variance, but the concept's the same anywhere you are. Companies make mistakes all the time, so it is always important to verify our bills, make sure what we are paying for. Some places or some companies will charge fees if your payments are late. Some have fairly high interest rates. So it's really important to always check to make sure that those bills are correct. And if there's mistakes, that's when we need to contact the companies earlier, the best. If we wait too long to contact them, they might help you for the last month of errors, but if there was 6 months of errors, and we'll say you simply should have called us sooner. So it is very, very important to check those bills. Another one is negotiating better plans. So it doesn't matter where you are. Most of us has some sort of service, be it cell phone, internet, TV, and pretty much anywhere when you first sign up for these services, we always get really great deals and great discounts, and there's great promotions. Unfortunately, those promotions tend to run out. So this really goes hand in hand with the first part. So when we're verifying our bills coming in, if we had some sort of promotion for services, well, we'll notice right away when those promotions are done because the cost goes up. And then when the cost goes up, that's usually a good time or indication to call the company because they usually have new promotions to offer us. It's also a good time to explore what other providers are out there and what do they have to offer you. Are there other providers that might give you the same service or similar service that works for you at a better price? Some people will just keep switching companies because you keep getting different promotions, but it's seeing what's out there and what's available. It's also another great time to review your services. We should definitely review our services at least once a year because what you need today and what you needed a year ago might be very different. Maybe you've got, cell phones, always a big one, be it here in Canada or other country. Most people don't even have landlines anymore. So cell phone, what do you need on there? Do you do a long distance? Do you need a long distance plan? I know a lot of people personally that when they're out of the country, they don't really use cell phone as far as texting and calling, but they'll use apps through internet because that's free. There's no long distance, there's no charges and so on. So then it means, do you need more internet, less texting options and so on. So it's simply looking at yourself, seeing what package you have for your services to make sure that you have what meets today's needs. So reviewing those once a year is definitely a great time to do that. Reducing banking cost. Again, depending on where you're banking, most banks have monthly fees for their services. Obviously, in Canada, with the BMO banking, you get the free banking. There's also additional virtual banks nowadays that offer no-fee banking, which I'll admit that I'm surprised not more banks are being pushed into the no-fee banking, considering what's available out there today. But it's really, again, looking at your need, how you utilize the products. Do you use debit card a lot? Do you only use debit on occasion? So then do you need an all-inclusive package that gives you unlimited debit usage? If you only use it on occasion, then you probably don't. So it's making sure that you pay for the service that you need. And then from there, it's often talking to your bank as well. What do they have to offer? Everybody likes to sell us the Cadillac package of here's everything included, but do I need it? So is there a cheaper package? A lot of banks offer discounts. If you keep a certain amount of money into your savings account, you might get a rebate, which might sound good, but it needs to be realistic. So if in your personal case, well, no, I can't keep $5,000 in my account on a regular basis, then that discount won't work for you. So when it comes to personal finance, that's why they call it personal. It's based on each individual's needs and requirements, which is often hard in these situations of, question and answers are very global because each individual is their own situation. And that's certainly how we deal with each member when we talk to them, be it even about just budgeting or anything like that. it's very individual. It's based on their personal scenario, your needs and such. So there's no real global answer, because in the end, it's your money. You get to decide on how you're going to spend it. What we try to teach you is show you how you spend it, so then you can make those kinds of decisions on, does that work for you or not? And again, through our tracking, we often get surprises and don't realize how we are spending our own money. And that exercise helps you kind of change habit and makes different decisions along the way. There's a lot of banking tools available. I've mentioned some applications earlier. Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, FCAC for short, is the federal agency that manages all banks here in Canada. They kind of oversee everything through federal banks. They have a lot of information on their website, tons of tools that are very, very useful. So that's a great resource that's available to you as well. Or again, here internally through SISIP, we've got a lot of tools that are available for you as well. Talked a little bit about cell phones because nowadays most people, as I said, don't even have landlines anymore. And cell phone costs definitely here in Canada are definitely more expensive than most places. Again, depending on which country you are, there's a lot of variance. It comes down to research, doing a little bit of research, maybe giving yourself a little bit of time, especially when you first get there, to kind of figure out what's the best option for you. Talking to people that have been there for a while. Do you mind talking about what do you get? How much do you pay for a cell phone? What's the deal? It's usually the best way to find out. I mean, here locally, it's easy for us. We're kind of used to it. But you get to another country, and again, depending on where you are, there's a lot of variance. So talking to people is a great way to find out information. And again, Google is our friend, looking up information, seeing what's available, and trying to find something that will fit your needs. Bundling of services, again, here used to be very, very popular. The more services you had with a company, you get additional discount. Now, bundling has disappeared quite a bit. And I don't know if something, depending on which country you're in, if that's something that they even offer. But when it comes to bundling, there's a lot less of it because people don't have don't have landline anymore. A lot of people don't have cable anymore. Basically, most services that a lot of people have now is cell phone and internet. That's it. Those are the only two services they have, which, average company would give you a 5% discount, but there's so many options on where to get those services, third-party companies that are cheaper than the big names. That bundling isn't, as good as it used to be, but it still exists. Ways to save on food. Groceries keeps getting more and more expensive. I think that's been worldwide. Eating out is always more expensive than anything else. So things like eating at home, packing a lunch can save us a lot of money. That coffee. So again, here at home, we always still love our Timmies, but some of us are sometimes surprised when we start tracking to find out how much we spend on those little things. And it's often those two, I'd say, from $1 to $5 purchases that we don't realize how much they add up. Perfect example is myself. Before I started doing my own tracking, I'd go to Timmy's on occasion, 2-3 times a day, get my coffee, sometimes, grab a muffin. And, how much do I spend on Timmy's? I thought, I don't know, $60, $80, maybe $100 a month, that's it. And then I started doing my tracking, adding it up, and realized that on average, was spending about $260 a month at Tim Hortons, which I thought was completely ridiculous for me. I thought that was just too much. So after my tracking, seeing that, decided to make some change of habits. Again, I still drink the same amount of coffee every day. I just don't go and buy it as much. So either I make it at home, drinking it, have coffee at the office. There's other ways, or I even bring a thermos when I need to. Still treat myself, once a day to my Timmy's. So I've brought that 260 down to about $60 a month on average. So now I've freed up $200 for something else that is more important to me. So that's a great example of the power of tracking. Tracking shows us exactly what we're spending and where, so then we can make decisions. It's not that I couldn't afford spending that much at Timmy's. I just thought it was ridiculous. I wanted my money to do something better for me than just spending it on Timmy's. So each of us have those kinds of things. It's just figuring out what works for you. Veg out, meatless meal. I'm not going to say that it's the solution. The way I look at that one, because vegetables can be just as expensive as meat. It's making those personal decisions, depending on, the things you like to buy, or certain weeks. If we look here, there's this week where, for example, ground beef is priced through the roof. It's ridiculous. It just means that, okay, maybe this week we don't eat ground beef. What else is available? What's on sale? What's a more reasonable price? So it's making that choice of how much are we willing to pay for certain things. And again, that decision is a very personal one that each individual needs to decide of what are they willing to spend on certain things, but no understanding that there's opportunity that if we make different decision, it can save us some money that we can then spend on other things that in the end are more important to us. Cooking a big dish, weekends, weekdays, doesn't matter. When you're a large family, you're making a big dish already, probably gets all eaten. But when you're either a single individual or maybe just two of you, I find it easier to cook for 10 than cook for one. So again, you make a large portion of something. You can make containers. Most places have a microwave somewhere. So now you got lunches you can bring to work. Or you get home, don't feel like cooking. Again, pull something out of the fridge or freezer that's homemade. 3 minutes later in the microwave, you've got yourself a home cooked meal, saved you some money. So that is a great way to save. And a lot of times, again, depending on where you are, definitely here in North America, as we all know, the family packs are always the ones on sale. But single individuals or couples sometimes might not go for that because, well, that's too much food. But again, just if it's something that you can prepare a large meal with, now not only are you saving money, you're also saving yourself time. Shopping with friends, discount markets and such. So again, those, we're talking about the Costco's of the world, those types of places are made for large families. So when it comes to single individuals or couples, you're getting too much of something. But looking at your friend circle, there might be some opportunity to be able to buy some items, and then you split the quantity, split the costs, and this way everybody saves. So that might be another opportunity. Then we said to set a budget and stick to it. So again, first you got to discover what are you currently spending. So we go back to your tracking, about 3 months worth, to identify what your average spend is. Once you know that what your average spend is, are you comfortable with that amount? Do you want to reduce? Do you want to change habits? And once you set an amount, then now through your tracking, you're making sure that you're staying on track. And again, if you spend a little bit more on occasion, that's okay, as long as you've got wiggle room in that budget. But the tracking will help us stick to that budget if that's one of the things that we want to stick to. Bring a list. Don't shop on an empty stomach. That's an old saying, but it's absolutely true. A list, first of all, lets us know what we need so we don't forget anything. Also tells us what we don't need. If it's not on the list, then we might not need it. And the shopping on an empty stomach is absolutely true, especially when we don't have a list. All of a sudden, it's all about everything that looks good right now because we're hungry, and then we end up spending more money. And I'm living proof of that. For many, many years, I made that mistake. I used to always do my shopping, typically once a week. Sunday, I go do my groceries. I have very bad eating habit, so I'm usually shopping hungry because I haven't eaten yet. And I would spend way more on grocery than I should. And I'd buy things that just because I was hungry. So for me, I still have the bad eating habits, but bringing a list helped me really reduce my shopping costs when it comes to groceries. Because now if it's not on my list, I'm able to question myself to say, oh, wait a minute, do I actually need this? Or it's just because I'm hungry right now? And most of the time, the answer is it's because I'm hungry right now. So I'm going to stick to my list, make sure this is what I came for. This is what I knew that I needed. So when we do budget tracking, interestingly enough, not only does it tell you where you're spending money, but you're going to discover things about yourselves along the way. So for me, that was a discovery, absolutely, that I didn't change my bad habits, but I did discover that I was overspending and buying a lot of last minute things because of that hunger. And now bringing a list helped me save a fair amount when it comes to grocery shopping and not overbuying. So, and that's a fairly common one for a lot of people. Do you really need a car? So again, depending on where you are, if there's public transportation and such, a car is an expensive thing to have. You know, they don't call them money pits for nothing because gas costs us money and they don't gain value. They lose value as the years go by. So it's making sure of looking at what your needs truly are. You know, especially when it comes to brand new cars, they keep getting more and more expensive. Most people, you're looking into minimum 5 years around here, up to 8 years when it comes to a car loan. So, especially being outcan, you got to plan. How long are you there for? So, starting, you know, getting payments into a brand new vehicle for 8 years, if you're only scheduled to be there for 5, is going to be an issue when coming back. So planning ahead, trying to figure out what's going to work for you. I'm a huge fan of the secondhand vehicle market. I think it saves you a lot of the initial depreciation, a lot less expensive, and easier to buy. But again, just making sure that you know that vehicle and what you pick is not only going to meet your needs, but is going to work with your budget. I've got, you know, not to date myself, but about 12, 15 years of financial counseling experience now. And the purchase of a vehicle is often the trigger for financial difficulty. So there's certain things in life that tends to create financial problems, and the purchase of a vehicle is often one, especially when you finance that vehicle, because now you're stuck with it. You can't sell a finance vehicle because it's liened, and typically if you try to sell it, you're going to sell it for less than what you owe loan wise. So you're pretty much stuck with that vehicle. And that is remarkably one type of purchase that tends to get a lot of people in financial difficulty. So definitely be very, very careful. If you've got a good budget, you know your expenses, you know your cost of living. Now you're adding, you know, car maintenance, fuel expense, insurance to your budget, you can see if that's going to work in your budget before you make the purchase. So that's another great benefit of having that really good budget, is when you need to make this kind of purchase, you can know in advance if it's going to work or not, and then make the adjustments as needed. Owning a home, so being outcan, I'm going to assume most people don't typically purchase. Renting kind of makes sense, especially if you're there on a temporary basis. But even when you come back, depending on what your next posting is, with the expectation of duration, I know there's a lot of benefits available as well. But when it comes to home owning, typically you need to own it for at least 5 years to start getting a return into that investment. So yes, a home is typically an investment, but it's making sure that it's at the right place in the right time. Especially with the housing market, although it's quieted down a little bit in the last year, it's still a fairly volatile market here in Canada. So can you afford it? Any type of large purchase, it's always good to look in advance. There's all kinds of tools available. A couple of examples on screen here. GetSmartAboutMoney.ca. I mean, just again, Google, you know, loan calculator, car loan calculator. There's hundreds of them available. Mortgage calculators. Some are a little bit better than others. Or simply call us. This is part of what we do. We're here to help you get that second set of eyes. First of all, let's review that budget. Have you been budgeting? Is this multiple months of information that now you've gathered so we know it's pretty good? Or you just kind of did a budget because you're looking to make this, so we're not sure if this is necessarily perception versus reality. So we can kind of help you with that. And then from there, we've got tools here at our end that we're used to using as well. A lot of people coming back to Canada, for example, I'll meet with them because they're looking to buy a home and they want to make sure that, you know, they can afford the mortgage. They're not going to be house poor. And then it's thinking about all the expenses that come along with it. And again, you you might be well versed in that type of expense, but sometimes it's just nice to get that second set of eyes to look at things, make sure I haven't forgot about anything. Are some of the costs changed since you've been back to Canada and things of the sort. So again, you can always contact me directly, go through the SISIP website, and we're more than happy to just review things with you, make sure that it makes sense, give you our professional opinion, sometimes give you some things to think about. Maybe we even have things that might help you through that process that might be available. So it's confidential, it's free, so it never hurts to just give us a call, and we're more than happy to help with that. So we've talked about a lot of different little tips and ways that can save you money. So here's just kind of again, a quick example to show you what this all means. So we talked about saving on food. So taking a lunch, like for example, 3 times a week. So we're saying that, average cost to eat out for lunch. And again, these numbers probably need to be updated, but let's say you pay $8 for your lunch. So if you bring a lunch, it still costs you something, but it costs you a little bit less. So now it's costing you $5 a day. So you're saving $15 a week, 60 a month, 720 by the end of the year. So again, the little amounts add up. Transportation, using transit versus owning a car. So again, expenses between wear and tear, potential parking, fuel expense, and transit fare can save you a fair bit. And same with cell phone. Comparing, what do you have package-wise? Are you pay as you go? Is it a monthly? What does your monthly package include? Is there all kinds of extras you don't need? So again, if you save yourself, $7 a week or $30 a month, that's another 360 at the end of the year. So the small expenses do add up. A great one is, banking fees. Most people, it's $17, $16.95 on average for most banks. So let's call it $17 a month. Well, that's $204 a year. Most people don't change bank very often. So you've been paying that $17 for the last, 10 years with the bank. That's $2,000 that, we pay them for the benefit of using our own money. So those little fees, those little things add up. So it's really looking and tracking at all these things to really see that spending and find opportunities to save ourselves some money. So managing your cost of living, we're going to talk quickly about needs and wants. So what is a latte factor? We've all have a latte factor regardless of our income level. So what we call a latte factor is those little treats in life, little things we like. So I talked about my Timmy's earlier. That's my latte factor. For me, that was it. For some, it's Starbucks. For some people, it's eating out. Sometimes it's collections. There's all kinds of things. I always love people going to, I go to the dollar store and I buy things there. Okay, it's the dollar store, which most dollar store now is $1.50 and up. But when you're spending 60, 70, $80 at the dollar store, you might have a lot of stuff, but you just still spent, $80 on things that you need or want is the big difference. So it's okay to have, these latte factors and little things that we enjoy in life. Everyone has them. The question is, how much are we willing to spend on them? And that's a personal question that everyone's going to answer very, very differently. But that's where, again, your tracking comes into play. I was not willing to spend $260 a month on average at Tim Hortons. I'm more than okay with my $60, $70 a month. That I'm okay with. Do I need it? No, it's a want, but I've earned that want and I'm okay with it. Not a problem. So everyone has those types of things. So your tracking will show you, and then you can make decision on, is your latte factor worth that much to yourself, or do you want to make changes because in the end, there are other things that are more important to you. So I'm not saying you need to cut things out. You just need to know what it is you spend so you can decide how much you want to spend on those types of things. So the questions to ask yourself, especially when it comes to spending is, well, the first one, when does a want become a need? Well, that's a marketing lie. I have also studied marketing, and a want is a want, a need is a need. You can't change one into another. Now, in today's world, if we believe advertising and everything that we see, pretty much everything is a need. Now, if we look at the basic definition of a want and need, financially, this is how it's defined. A need is something you need to survive. So food, shelter, utilities, some clothing, emphasis on some, and things of the sort. Those are needs, absolutely. Everything else is a want. Again, in today's world, though, when we want something, it's almost turned against us where, well, that's greedy. You want something. I only buy needs. Well, no, it's normal to have wants. We all have wants, and that's okay. But if you start using those words based on those definitions, so a need is something you need to survive, and a want is everything else, it'll change your attitude towards spending. And that's okay, because again, it's the world marketers have told us that we need everything. So if I say I need a laptop, I'm justifying it internally, psychologically. It's like, oh, I need it. Versus if I say I want a laptop, which is absolutely okay to want, now you're able to look at it a little bit differently to say, okay, I want it, but can I afford it? So then that's where the budget goes. Am I able to just buy it? If I'm going to finance it, how much is it going to cost me in additional costs and interest? And now you're able to make that decision with a different light. So using the word need and want, the way they were supposed, or they used to be used, and the way they were meant to be used, will actually help you spend less. And I love annoying my friends with that, because they say, oh, I need this, I need that. And I just correct them. So you mean you want? Oh, same thing. Not the same thing. There's a difference between a need and a want. And again, having wants is absolutely normal, and there's nothing wrong with having wants. Then you got to look at what motivates you to buy. Again, everyone's a little bit different. We talked about self-discovery earlier on through your budget tracking, and this is part of it as well. Everyone's different on what triggers them to buy. So if you put a conscious effort of trying through your tracking, of trying to see, you'll start seeing things. Impulse buying for a lot of people is a big one. So you go out, you see things, maybe it's on sale, wasn't planned, you buy it. Well, that's an impulse buy, and it wasn't planned. You weren't, you didn't go out to do that purchase. For a lot of people, that can be a trigger. So you might discover that your impulse shopping is high, or buying at discount stores, but then, we spend twice as much because everything is cheap. Well, it's cheap, but we spent more than we intended to. So those self-discoveries, through budget tracking are very interesting. You'll discover about yourselves. And then from there, you're able to make decisions about it. We talk about your purchases make you happier. So it's the old shopping therapy, which we all love to joke about. Oh, shopping therapy, yes, but for some people, it's a challenge. When you're having a bad day, something's going on. You go shopping, you buy something, makes you feel better. But usually the issue with that is that feeling doesn't last. So a day or so later, you're still feeling bad. So you go back to shopping, because every time we shop, it makes us feel better. So again, it's being able to identify that type of behavior in ourselves to then be able to try to control it and try to make changes. Then we got to look at all the needs that are now collecting dust. Ooh, I need this, bought it, never used it. We all have those things. Clothing's a great one. Ooh, that shirt's fantastic. I need it. I'm going to buy it. Never worn it. Again, it's normal. We all do it. It's just trying to be more conscious about those things. And again, our budget tracking, when we track our spending, it lets us see those types of things a lot faster, and we can start seeing patterns. So tracking, like I say, I'll keep saying it, is very, very important, and it will teach us a lot about ourselves and will help us manage our money. And the last one, absolutely true. It's what can we learn to live without? Again, it's about choice. Human nature, we want it all, and that's normal. We all do, but we can't have it all. So we do need to make choices along the way. And that's where our tracking is going to help us figure out, what's a need, what's a want, and what is a priority to you as per what are you going to spend your money on, and what are you willing to not give up? What are you willing to give up to get the things that you really, really want and are really important to you? So there's always choices to be made. It's part of life, but budget tracking helps us through that choice process and making some of those kinds of decisions. So touched a little bit about impulse buying, which again, a lot of us don't realize how much we spend. So if you identify that impulse buying is something that impacts you, so then it's avoiding trips to the store. I'm just going to browse, but then we don't browse, we always buy. So then if, we're having a bad day, going to browse is probably not a good idea. Same with buying online and Amazon and all those places. Yeah, they're great and practical, absolutely. But if we identify that we're ordering and buying way more than what we need, and then maybe we need to, like, maybe I'm not going to stop browsing Amazon, or I'm going to turn off notifications, or I'm not going to just go take a walk to window shop, because I don't window shop. I always end up buying something. So again, your tracking will show you some of those things. And then these are just ways and tips on how you can help reduce, or change those habits. Paying cash. Again, debit, credit, great way. Most of us don't even have to sign or put in a PIN for most of the purchases we do. We tap everywhere. It's so easy and convenient. Yes, it's a great way to make us spend more money. In the end, that's what it is. And it's also very virtual, right? We don't even see the money. So especially when it comes to just day-to-day spending, maybe your coffee, eating out, and just miscellaneous spending, utilizing cash is not a bad way, because now you pretty much are putting yourself on an allowance. You decide what that amount is, but if you say, all right, I give myself $100 a week for eating out, miscellaneous spending, and my coffees. Okay, that's your money for the week. It's the beginning of the week. You put that $100 in your pocket. So that type of transaction, now you don't even need to track anymore because you're using cash. So if 3 days into that week, you've spent your 100, that's it. You're done on those things, because now you're just following the money. So if you don't cheat, it absolutely works as a tracking method. But it also might help you make different decisions, because if, again, 3 days into that week, you've already spent 50 of your 100, now you're about to spend another 30 on going out for lunch with friends or whatever, you might rethink that to say, well, I got more things coming this week. I don't want to overspend on my budget. I'm already down, this amount. So you might make a different choice, because when we see that money disappear, now it becomes a lot more real. We're seeing the money. It's not just numbers, on the internet, in the cloud, and through your bank account that we don't go look at because we don't want to see the balance on our account. So utilizing cash can help us save money. If credit is a temptation, for some people, they just know and admit that, if they've got credit, they use it. Then don't bring credit cards with you. If the limits are very high, because some banks can be very generous with their available credit given to you because you've got good credit. Again, if you don't need that much, you can tell them to reduce that. For the average individual, do you need 10, 15, 20, $25,000 line of credit on a credit card? Are you going to need that in a month or in a pinch for an emergency? For most people, you're looking at, 2,500, 5,000, maybe even 7,000. It's more than enough on a normal basis. Now, if you need more for something specific, first of all, credit card is not usually the best tool to use. That's where a line of credit would be a lot cheaper to finance basically that type of purchase. But if the bank was willing to give it to you before, if you need it again, you call them, they're probably going to be willing to re-increase your limit anyway. But on a day-to-day, if you don't need that much, it doesn't give you any great benefits to have. And if your wallet, credit cards get stolen, it just creates more potential issues. Although, yes, you do have some protection, it's still a lot of paperwork and potential problems. So again, reducing available credit is a way to manage. Leaving the credit cards at home, especially if you're just going to browse, again, to reduce impulse shopping. Well, I only have so much money on me. I don't have my credit cards. I can't make the purchase. So now you're reducing the impulse buy. Now it happens that we're going to be out there and see things, and it's a great deal and we want it. But usually the key is to give yourself a bit of time. So you saw something, it wasn't planned, sleep on it. Think about it. If the next day you still like, yeah, that was a really good deal, I really want that, no problem. You go back and you buy it. It's not an impulse buy anymore, because now you gave yourself a chance to really think about it, sleep on it, go back the next day, make the purchase, that's no longer considered an impulse buy because you had time to think about it. But in almost 90% of the cases, people are not willing to go back to get whatever the item was. Well, if we're not willing to go back for it, then it was just an impulse buy. We didn't really want it that bad. It's just because we were there at that time, and it just, it was easy. And that's, again, human nature. Now, when it comes to making changes to our habits, spending habits and everything like that, one of the most important thing is baby steps. Human nature, once again, most people, we don't like change. We're used on how we do things, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So when it comes to our spending habits, it's the same thing. Don't try to change too much too quickly. First do your budget tracking, see, what's there. If you identify some areas you want to make some changes, start with one, pick one. All right, I'm overspending on, let's say, groceries. We're throwing out food. There's just too much, or maybe I'm buying, I need to eat something, then, the best steak, once a week, whatever it is. Okay, start work on that one. Do that for a couple of months. See the change. Oh, look at that. We're spending a little bit less last couple of months on groceries. We've been paying attention. And now the change after 3-4 months, starts to become the norm. Okay, where else? Is there somewhere else we can make some changes? Because if you try to change too much too quickly, again, human nature, we tend to get discouraged. We feel like we can't spend our own money, and then we just give up and just go back to the old ways. And that is just not, the intent of this. The intent is for you to be successful. And the best way for you to be successful is, again, give yourself time. Slowly but surely, keep on it. And then once you get used to some of the first change or two, you can move on to other areas and continue. So make sure to give yourself that chance. All right, so that is the presentation on budgeting and tips on savings. I'm going to put my direct contact information on the screen so you all have it. Again, feel free to contact me. You can email me directly, not a problem. You can go through our website at SISIP.com. There's our 1-800 number. So there's a lot of different ways for you to contact us. Again, it can just be general questions, budget review, help with creating your budget. There can be, we also do debt management. So if there's debts, things that you can help with. We work very, very closely with supporter troops and all of their programs. So, there's no bad questions. That's what we are here for, is assist you in whatever your need is. As I've mentioned before, I've done a lot of just budget reviews with people, or sharing some of the tools we have for budget tracking and budgeting. Again, looking at some of the tips and discounts that are available depending on each scenario. So we're always happy to help. Again, I work with all of the OutCan folks. So I'm very flexible with my time. I know there's a lot of different time changes and such. Don't worry about that. We always find the way. I do find that Teams is typically a great way to meet for OutCan folks, because landlines tend to be a little bit tricky. So typically, I will always suggest a Teams meeting, an online meeting. Just makes it a little bit easier for all of us. But definitely, I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. Hopefully, you all picked up a little bit of information, a few tips and tricks. We will, like I say, feel free to contact me at any point in time, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.